Hello everyone. Today I'm going to do a presentation of scenario-based self-regulated learning. So let's get started. First off, here I explain what's actually, waiting for you. I've actually divided this presentation into two parts, phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 here, this is where I'm going to be talking about someone who struggles with being overly agreeable and how he overcomes this problem by using SRL strategies. And in the phase 2, I'm going to talk about SRL based activities in an English language classroom. So let's get started. From overly agreeable to assertive. First off, I'm going to explain this person. This person is, his name is Yeet, and he's an overly agreeable person. Before getting started, here I explained how an agreeable person typically acts. So, agreeableness is a personality trait associated with cooperation, politeness, and a desire to avoid conflict. In real life, an overly agreeable person often, always says yes. You know, they take on favors, tasks, or obligations to please others, rarely refuses requests even when inconvenient, and avoids confrontation. They suppress disagreement to keep peace, avoid expressing personal opinions in group decisions, and they prioritize others over self. Often, he sacrifices personal needs, goals, or desires to make others happy. And the last one is seeks approval. He often worries about how others perceive them and adjusts behavior to gain acceptance. So this is actually a learning problem because the person in question hasn't been able to, learn to say no. And the learner realizes this pattern is harmful and decides to change it intentionally and using SRL strategies. So the scenario is here. A university student named Yi is highly agreeable and avoids disagreement to maintain harmony, and as a result, the student agrees with others even when he disagrees internally, and takes on unwanted responsibilities, feels resentment and emotional exhaustion, and experiences anxiety before group discussions or decisions. As you can see in the picture on the left here, he's like, the person says, can you help me move this weekend? And he probably doesn't want to do this, but just because, just to not break her heart, maybe he says, okay, I will do it. And here is a great example of an instance. Because he is a very agreeable person, he can't say be quiet to his roommates when he wants to sleep. And in this particular instance, he has exams tomorrow, and it is 2 a.m. His roommates are chatting and laughing in a very loud manner, but still he cannot work up the courage to say, please stop talking, I have to sleep. Because he fears his friends are just going to ostracize him, and he takes the exams having gotten only a couple hours of sleep, and he doesn't get good grades from those exams simply because he couldn't say no. And as you can see here, he says, I wish they would be quiet, but I can't say anything. And they're chatting in the background. And here he regrets not being able to say anything and says, if only I had said something, because he got a bad grade. The problem here is, despite being socially skilled, he lacks assertiveness, confuses disagreement with conflict, automatically says yes without reflection, and feels guilty after expressing personal needs. And this is a self-regulation problem, and obviously not a knowledge problem. And here is an SRL analysis. Here I explain actually what is missing here. And this also divides into four parts: cognitive, motivational, metacognitive, and behavioral. So in cognitive, no mental framework for disagreement, and difficulty forming clear personal opinions. And he has that all or nothing thinking. He thinks that if I disagree, I'll hurt them. And metacognitive part, here he has no awareness of automatic agree responses and no monitoring of emotional reactions during the conversation and no reflection after social interactions. And in the motivational part, he has low self-efficacy in assertiveness, fear-based motivation, which means he avoids rejection, and lack of personal boundary goals. And in the behavioral part, he he actually has like no rehearsed responses, no controlled exposure to disagreement, and no feedback or practice system. So here is SRL based solution. This is learning to be appropriately disagreeable. Not too much, but a little bit disagreeable. Being a little bit disagreeable is not a bad thing. So cognitive SRL strategies: changing how the learner thinks, learning the difference between disagreement and disrespect. This is an important part. Creating disagreement scripts. He can say, I see it differently because I think the alternative might take longer than we think. Or he might say, I understand your point, but you know I maybe I understand your point about working late tonight, but I prefer to finish project tomorrow morning when I'm focused. And he can also write down personal opinions before group discussions. And as you can see in the picture on the left, he is talking to his boss, and his boss says, this is what I think we should do. And he actually objects to him, saying, I see it differently because etc, blah blah. And why this works: these strategies help organize thoughts and reduce cognitive overload during real conversations. Here, metacognitive SRL strategies: this is awareness and control of the process. He has to monitor moments when the urge to agree appears, and he has to ask internal questions, like he has to ask to himself, do I actually agree, or am I avoiding discomfort? And also reflect after interactions, did I express my real view, or why not? And why this works: metacognitive monitoring interrupts automatic agreeable behavior and enables conscious choice. And as you can see in the picture on the left, she says, can you help me move this weekend? And he says, I see it differently because I've got plans. I understand, but I prefer not to this time. He is just trying to become a little bit more assertive here. Here, motivational SRL strategies: this is changing emotional drivers. He has to reframe disagreement as self-respect and not selfishness, because he tends to think that just because he disagrees with somebody, it's just going to come across as you know selfishness, but it's not that. And positive self-talk: here he can say, like, my opinion has value. And setting identity-based goals: he can say, like, I'm someone who communicates honestly. And why this works: motivational regulation reduces guilt and increases confidence in assertive behavior. Here, this is the phase 2 part. This is the phase 2. I am going to talk about 3 classroom activities here. This is completely irrelevant to the previous one. So classroom activity, this is called my reason and my goal, and this uses motivation. This is motivational SRL focused activity. So what it is essentially is, at the beginning of the lesson, the teacher introduces a simple task. This can be preparing a short opinion statement or dialogue. And before starting, students complete a motivational card with prompts. And you know they they say things like, or they complete a motivational cart with prompts such as, why is this task useful for me, and what do I want to do well today, or how confident do I feel right now, and they can actually rate it on a scale of 1 through 10. And students then work on the task while keeping their personal goal visible on their desks. And at the end of the activity, students revisit their motivation card and reflect. They can say to themselves things like, did I try even when it was difficult, or what helped me stay motivated? And at the end of the activity, students revisit and their motivation card and reflect, like I said. And here I explained how this activity actually develops motivational SRL. Students see personal meaning in the task, and motivational becomes self-generated and not teacher-driven. And this is, I think this is the most important part, because motivation has to come from within and not from, external factors like your teacher or your peers. Learners practice managing effort and persistence, and confidence increases through self-reflection. And this activity is called Plan, Monitor, Reflect. This is a reading task, and this is metacognitive SRL focused activity. So here what happens is students are given a short English text. This can be like an article or a story excerpt, and the activity is divided into 3 explicit metacognitive stages: plan, monitor, and reflect. So in the plan part, here students answer guiding questions like, what's my goal for reading this task, or what strategies will I use if I don't understand? And students write their plan briefly. In the monitor part, this is of course going to happen during reading, and while reading, students stop after each paragraph and ask themselves, do I understand this part, or should I slow down a little bit, or change my strategy? And they place symbols in the task, and this is a very important one. The tick means I understand this, and the question mark means I need to reread this, and the star means this is a very important idea and I'll come back to it later, maybe. And reflect, this is going to happen after reading, and after finishing, students complete a reflection saying, did I reach my reading goal, or which strategy worked best, or what will I do differently next time? And how this activity develops metacognitive SRL: students become aware of their own thinking, they learn to control and regulate comprehension, strategy use becomes intentional rather than automatic, and learners rely less on the teacher and more on self-reflection. And this is the last classroom activity here. Focus time check. Behavioral SRL focused activity this is. And students are given an English task. This can be like, doing a presentation or something like that. And before starting, they create a plan that focuses on how they will manage their behavior during the task, and quickly decide how many minutes they will work, where they will sit to stay focused, what they will do if distracted, and they complete the task while following their plan. And afterwards, they answer, did I stay focused, and did I manage my time well? And here I explain how this activity develops behavioral SRL. Students actively control their learning environment. They practice managing attention and effort. Help seeking becomes strategic and not passive. And learners become kind of more independent in task completion. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.